Q&A or questions or anything we can sort of, with our experts here, we can try to facilitate that.
One sort of detailed question, of course, back to your presentation, Judith. You mentioned that there were 3 accreditation levels, and the tool that you use has 5-level maturity scale. How are those 2 linked, if at all?
But the maturity scale is used in the initial assessment to identify how mature your innovative thinking is. So, for example, if you take one of the questions on the assessment would be about a culture of innovation and what that would look like. A company that's new to innovation would look very different to a company that is at a sort of level 5. And the thinking behind it is that this has to be applicable in all companies, and there are companies that are going to be only sort of getting on the first rung of the ladder, but it has to appeal to companies that are really innovative, and particularly when we looked at the Singapore model, we want to really stretch people, but we didn't want to have 5 levels of accreditation because we felt that was too many. So it comes down to the scoring process, and where it differs from a sort of EFQM is it's not a numbers game. It's about identifying what areas are appropriate for you to focus on, and you aiming to be sort of at that 3, 4, 5 level within the maturity scale. But overall, your company may be a level 1 or a level 2 in terms of accreditation. So the thinking behind it was very much to ensure that people will be able to get accredited at the lower levels, but also that it will challenge the very innovative organisations.
I'll give you a specific example, just because sometimes I think an example can really illustrate what you mean. Take the idea generation process Paul related to. Some organisations don't have an idea generation process, so it's very informal. So that's quite an immature stage. Then moving along the scale of maturity, perhaps the next stage might be a structured gathering of ideas. Then the next one might be organised teams that actually take ideas and concepts and work on specific projects that are set up and taken down. And then perhaps the next stage might be the involvement of suppliers and key customers in the innovation and idea generating process where they're actively engaged. And then perhaps the last one might be a kind of systemic company-wide open innovation forum where there's a range of activities and everybody's involved to give ideas no matter where you sit in the organisation. Perhaps what we might call a distributed enterprise type gathering of ideas. And each one is more complex than the one before. As maturity comes, so you graduate. As we were doing the research for it, as Judith mentioned, the Centre for Competitiveness did the research for it, and I led the team for that. There was a realisation that there are these broad maturity scales as you look at organisations around the world, and there is a progression amongst them. And what we wanted to do was create accreditation that recognised achievement in results as well as activity. So it was combined with just the fact you're doing it. We also want to see the evidence and the results of it. But 5 levels of accreditation just smacks of a money-making scheme, and it's not meant to be that. So it's based on characteristics of behaviour and what we see in organisations. And so for each of the 5 maturity levels, there's profiles for each of the questions to relate to each of the 9 areas. And whilst Paul's model that he showed has been developed to the one that you've seen there, if you look carefully at it, it's the same content. So we've just made the model sexier looking in that sense. But it's about characteristics and behaviours. And then at key moments, there's 3 key levels of accreditation. Again, we use our European benchmarking and our EFQM as the guidance for this, because this is what we do, and we do this well. So we have a lower level, which, as Judith referred to, enables companies to get off and up and running. There's a great need for a minimum standard, if you will. This is where DETI was coming from, to try and have 400 organisations with this minimum standard of innovative capability. But also, we want to have an opportunity to really test our best companies and the organisations that aspire to be the best companies, like Cherry Plastics and Polymers. And so we have this very mature, higher level, which equates to European and international best practice. It's not numbers based, it's characteristic based, but that's what it equates to. And I guess that's where the Centre for Competitiveness, that's the skill set we bring in all of this, is to be able to make those assessments and calibrations against standards and frameworks.
And
So
it's
that's
very-
not too long-winded an answer. It was a really good question.
Just to add to it, it's a very flexible programme too in terms of the programme itself being innovative, because rather than being a sort of audit process where it's against numbers, you know, there are some elements that you won't be able to control. For example, PwC are doing this internally on themselves. And, you know, one element of your Googles and your Microsofts, as Paul alluded to, is the risk taking. But PwC as an organisation is, I think it's extremely risk averse, you know, for
Absolutely.
it has to be, and the risk processes are very stringent, you know, so we're not going to change that because it would ultimately affect our business. So you're still able to get accredited without that, you know, pulling you down factors that your business, that define your business and that you can't change. So
It's to work for you, is this, not
Yeah.
against.
I hate to sound negative because I'm not. In a small organisation like ourselves, this is the only one I can relate to, where we have between 6 and 10 people. There is a time scale involved, and commercial constraints don't allow time scales. And whether you like it or not, the harsh reality of life. What's the time that you have to? Can you build it into your commercial day?
Good question.
Yeah.
I think the way we would answer this, I think you're right. Time and resource, and when is it appropriate to do this?
Yeah.
And I on one hand, it's never the right time. It's never appropriate. There's always something happening. But I think organisations that aspire after excellence, that seek this kind of journey towards international best practice, make the time. Obviously, the money you pay gets you a number of days of facilitation from PwC. And then there's a requirement for you as an organisation to put some time in that as well, because you're undertaking to do things. I think the answer is twofold. One is it's about balancing the immediate impact of putting this time and getting an immediate response with building processes and systems that become embedded in your organisation and therefore make it more sustainable. No point PwC coming in, working with you, and you think it's great, you get an immediate impact. And then when they go away again, it all stops. There has to be something behind. So that takes a wee bit of time. But what in the centre, what we would say is about this whole excellence thing, is that within 6 or 9 months, 12 months, it starts to become the way you work, part of the way you work. And so therefore people think of it less as upfront loading. The first time you do it, it seems like, oh, they're coming in from PwC, we have to have this ready for it. That very quickly evaporates into, it's now the way we work, innovation's important, they're coming in and it's part of a planned process. And I think maybe Paul would sort of...
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want me to say a little bit, I mean, Cherry Pipes didn't have any people dedicated to this. They weren't particularly interested in innovation, but then they started to see some real benefits, and then we started getting more people. But also, like Adrian says, the way we do things, I mean, you have a problem and you want to innovate around that problem, you become faster at it every time you do it.
Yeah.
So, although you have to spend some time up front, you probably, in terms of how efficiently you solve problems, will probably make up for any time that you spend up front in doing that. And I would say within 1 to 2 years, you can expect that to be, your payoff. I would say, because people, whenever they're trained to think and create ideas quickly and how to evaluate them in a formalised way, and how to capture ideas from the external environment and implement those, I think those things will result in more efficiency savings. And of course, if you don't do it, there's a big risk here that you're going to become irrelevant, in a short time.
the programme itself has been developed to account for the lack of time that people have. So the actual assessment phase, it's not an audit process where we're asking to see documents and evidence. It's not an evidence-based process. The assessment only takes a couple of hours, and it's up to the company to nominate the number of people that they want to be. Depending on the size of your company, you get a better feel, obviously, the more people you do it with. But if it's a small company, you're only talking about a few hours, and then the actual PwC time is minimum, but it's helping you across a 12-month journey. So the actual input from you is what you can afford, but it's as part of your daily work as opposed to specifically the programme.
Okay, thanks.